After Aston Martin submitted a request for a right of review late on Sunday night, Fernando Alonso could reclaim the third-place finish he had earned in the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Alonso had the lead in the race for a few laps early on, however, he was shortly penalized for starting outside his grid position, and the penalty was for 5 seconds. Join us here at Velocity City as we uncover the unbelievable twist in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Aston Martin fans go wild, so let's dive into the video. The two-time world champion received an additional 10-second penalty for failing to serve the first penalty in a prescribed manner. As a result, he was eliminated from contention for the podium, and Mercedes' George Russell moved up to the third position. Perez started in the pole position, but Fernando Alonso passed him on the run down to turn 1. However, Perez eventually returned and passed Alonso again later in the race. Max Verstappen, who was Perez's teammate who started the race from the 15th position on the grid because he had a problem with his drive shaft during qualifying, finished the race in second place. The initial decision made by the stewards was that the penalty had not been imposed appropriately because the rear jack had made contact with the vehicle earlier than the allotted 5 seconds had passed. When Fernando Alonso was competing in Jeddah, why was he initially given a penalty? At the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, Fernando Alonso might have acknowledged his 100th rostrum appearance in Formula 1. But the happiness appeared to be fleeting when the stewards assessed him a 10-second penalty after the race that dropped him to P4. However, the decision was ultimately overturned hours later, yet why exactly was the Spaniard punished in the first place? Alonso sent the audience into a craze when he sprinted off the line to take the lead from Perez into turn 1. Russell was able to slot into P3 ahead of Stroll and Sainz. Most drivers elected to use medium tires when the lights went down and the grid was set. However, just a few moments later, the stewards noted an incident involving Alonso, precisely an incorrect starting location. A time penalty of 5 seconds had been assessed against Alonso as replay showed him stopping to the left of his grid box. Despite the fact that the Spanish started the race at the Jeddah Corniche circuit in a poor position, he had an incredible launch from second on the grid and was eventually able to pass the driver who had started in the pole position. But it was while Alonso was serving the 5-second penalty in the pits, under the watchful eye of a safety car, that he was called out to clear up the Aston Martin driven by a teammate, Lance Stroll. The trouble truly started for Alonso, and it continued until the end of the race. As soon as Alonso learned of the sanction, his rearview mirror was filled with Perez's Red Bull, and after the DRS overtaking assistance was engaged, Perez retook the position down the main straight, despite locking up his brakes while braking for the first turn. Alonso won the first lap of a Grand Prix for the first time in almost 11 years. The race in Germany in 2012 was the most recent time he held this position. Alonso finished on the podium for the 100th time ever in his career, becoming the 6th driver in Formula 1 history to accomplish this feat. Lewis Hamilton, Michael Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel, and Kimi Räikkönen preceded him in this achievement only. As a result of Alonso's podium finish, he has now finished on the podium in consecutive races for the first time since the 2013 Singapore Grand Prix. Before the opening race of the 2023 season in Bahrain, Alonso had yet to finish on the podium since the 2021 Qatar Grand Prix. Nevertheless, the FIA has now changed their minds and published a document stating that it had reversed its judgment. The paper also said that Aston Martin had written a letter requesting that the 10-second penalty be reconsidered. To provide support for the petition for review, the stewards were presented with minutes from the most recent meeting of the SAC as well as video evidence of 7 different instances in which cars were touched by the jack while serving a penalty that was comparable to the one that was imposed on car 14. None of these other cars were given an additional sentence. The team made it abundantly clear in its argument that the alleged representation of an agreement between the FIA and the teams that were touching the car in any way, including with a jack, would constitute working on the vehicle for Article 54(4)(c) of the sporting regulations, was incorrect, and as a result, the basis of the stewards' decision was wrong. This was the main argument that the team presented. The stewards had to determine if there was a significant and relevant new element that was revealed that was unavailable to the parties seeking the review at the time of the decision concerned. In light of the petition, the stewards would have to decide whether the decision needed to be changed in any way if there were such elements. The stewards determined that there was significant and relevant new evidence as required by Article 14(1)(1) to trigger a review of the decision, particularly the video evidence and the verbal evidence from the team and the FIA. This was determined after the stewards reviewed the presented video evidence and heard from the team representative of Aston Martin and the relevant members from the FIA. The newly introduced evidence made it quite evident to us that the fundamental premise upon which the initial decision was constructed, namely, the claim that there was an agreement, was susceptible to being called into doubt. Hence, we moved on to the next step, which was to hear the meat of the request for review. After going over the new evidence, we concluded that there was not a definitive agreement between the parties. It may be used to evaluate whether the parties agreed that touching an automobile with a jack would be considered working on it, as was previously indicated to the stewards. This was our conclusion after going over the new evidence. In light of the events that transpired, we determined that our initial choice to apply a penalty on car 14 needed to be revoked, and we did so following this assessment. As a result, Alonso maintains his third-place finish from Jeddah, which also marks the 100th podium finish of his career in Formula One. Alonso did an excellent job of taking the lead from Perez into Turn 1, but he was forced to settle for third place after receiving a time penalty for lining up outside his grid box. In addition to the relentless speed of the Red Bulls, this caused him to stay caught up. However, it was determined that Alonso's rear jack mechanic had touched the car before his penalty had been served. As a result, the Spaniard received a further 10-second penalty after the race, which dropped him to fourth place. After revisiting the decision, the stewards decided that Alonso's P3 would remain, reversing their call and moving Mercedes' George Russell back to P4. As a result of this decision, Alonso became the 6th driver in F1 history to gain 100 podiums. So that's all for today's video, and if you liked it, then please subscribe to Velocity City. See you all in the next video.